Black Waitress stopped the billionaire from signing. What she did next. Left the room. Stunned. ChatGPT said, the banquet hall glittered with wealth, chandeliers pouring golden light over polished marble floors, while guests in tailored suits whispered about the deal that was about to be sealed. The billionaire sat at the head of the grand table, his pen hovering just above the crisp contract that promised to expand his empire beyond imagination. Cameras were ready. Investors leaned forward in excitement, and the room held its breath, waiting for the ink that would change fortunes. But just as silence turned into anticipation, a voice broke through, unexpected and firm. It was the Black Waitress who had been quietly moving between tables, carrying trays of glasses. She stepped closer, her face determined, and spoke words. That stopped the billionaire cold. The room erupted in shock, gasps echoing off the walls as everyone stared at her in disbelief. How could a waitress interrupt a billionaire at the peak of his glory? Yet her voice didn't tremble. She warned him not to sign, insisting that the papers contained traps hidden deep in the fine print. At first, laughter and scoffs rose from the crowd, powerful men and women mocking her audacity. But she didn't back away. With eyes locked on the contract, she explained how she had overheard conversations while serving nearby, conversations that revealed the deal was designed not to empower him but to strip him of control. The billionaire froze, confusion flickering across his face. He lowered the pen slightly, scanning the room, while investors shifted uneasily in their seats. Some rolled their eyes, convinced this was a ploy for attention, but others glanced nervously at the executives behind the deal, who suddenly looked less confident than before. The waitress, though standing alone, radiated a courage that silenced even the cruelest whispers. Instead of leaving her words hanging in the air, she reached into her pocket and revealed her proof. With her phone clutched tightly in her hand, she pressed play, and the room filled with the unmistakable voices of those very executives, laughing arrogantly about their scheme. Their words were chilling, a confession of how easily they would trick the billionaire, steal his assets, and control everything the moment his signature touched the page. The laughter on the recording cut through the room like a knife, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Guests who had mocked her just minutes earlier now sat frozen, unable to deny what they had heard. The billionaire leaned back slowly, his pen resting uselessly on the table as the truth sank in. Security moved quickly, storming toward the executives, who were pale with panic and fumbling for excuses. Gasps turned into murmurs, then into applause, as realization spread through the hall. This woman had saved him from a disaster. The billionaire rose to his feet, his eyes never leaving the waitress who had dared to speak up when no one else would. With a commanding voice, he silenced the room and declared his gratitude for her bravery, acknowledging that in a hall full of power, it was the least expected person who carried the greatest strength. The night ended not with the signing of a deal, but with a powerful reminder whispered among every guest as they left. True courage is not found in wealth or titles, but in the heart of someone willing to risk everything to stand for the truth. Whispers spread across the hall like wildfire, carrying disbelief, irritation, and a hint of nervousness. The billionaire's hand still hovered above the contract, his pen poised but frozen, while every eye turned toward the waitress who had dared to speak. She stood tall despite the heavy stares pressing down on her, her voice calm yet filled with urgency. She explained that while serving tables nearby, she had overheard conversations between the men who had prepared the contract. At first, she thought little of it, but as the details unfolded, it became clear that this deal was no opportunity. It was a carefully constructed trap. The contract was designed with hidden clauses buried deep in the fine print, clauses that would immediately transfer control of the billionaire's assets the moment his signature landed on the page. This was not speculation or a guess. It was a certainty, she said, her tone steady and unshaken. The words struck the air like a hammer, and the crowd stirred uneasily. Some scoffed, calling her boldness outrageous. They laughed under their breath, whispering insults about her being just a waitress, someone unworthy of interfering in business at such a level. Yet others could not ignore the faint quiver of fear in the eyes of the very executives who had brought the papers forward. Their smiles were tight, their posture suddenly rigid, as though the foundation of their confidence had been cracked. The billionaire leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. He had built empires on instincts, and now those instincts told him that this woman's courage was not born from desperation or arrogance, but from truth. Around them, the room divided itself, half of the guests mocking her bravery, dismissing her words as nonsense, while the other half exchanged uneasy glances, secretly praying she was wrong but fearing she might not be. The tension was sharp enough to cut through the lavish atmosphere. Still, she did not waver. Even as powerful men barked orders for her removal, even as murmurs of disrespect circled her like daggers, she stood her ground. Her chin lifted higher, her eyes fixed not on the crowd but on the billionaire himself, as though silently daring him to look past the glittering promises and see the danger hidden beneath. Every word she spoke carried weight, not because of her position, but because of the conviction laced within it. Her calm defiance created a strange silence, one that settled over the room and forced everyone to confront the possibility that she might be right. The billionaire, pen now resting against the table instead of the contract, breathed deeply, caught between doubt and belief. The room, once filled with chatter and celebration, had turned into a theater of suspense, all because one woman refused to let deceit triumph in silence. The air inside the banquet hall felt heavy, the silence stretching into something almost unbearable. Yet the waitress did not back down. For a brief second, it seemed she might falter under the glares and harsh whispers circling her like a storm, but instead, she reached into her pocket and revealed her phone. The sight of it sent a ripple through the crowd, murmurs rising as curiosity replaced ridicule. With trembling hands, though not with a trembling heart, she pressed play. In an instant, the room was filled with voices that no one could mistake, arrogant, careless, and full of deceit. The executives who had dressed the evening in promises of wealth were heard laughing, mocking the very billionaire they sought to manipulate. They bragged about how easily they would trick him, how blinded he was by his own ambition, and how the moment his pen touched the paper, his empire would quietly slip into their control. Their words dripped with greed, their laughter ringing like daggers, and as each second passed, the crowd's expressions shifted from disbelief to horror. The sound of the recording echoed against marble walls and crystal chandeliers, cutting deeper than any accusation could. The smug smiles of those executives who only moments before had appeared confident and untouchable drained from their faces. Their skin turned pale, their eyes darting around the room in desperation as if searching for an escape. Guests who had mocked the waitress now stared at her with a different kind of awe, realizing she had walked into a den of power and unmasked its darkest secret. Some lowered their heads in shame for doubting her. Others whispered furiously to one another, unable to believe that such a betrayal had been set into motion in plain sight. The billionaire's hand, which had hovered over the contract only moments earlier, now fell completely to his side. His pen lay useless on the table as his gaze fixed on the woman who had dared to challenge the false brilliance of the evening. The hall had transformed from a stage of celebration to a courtroom of truth. Each word on the recording was a blow to the grand illusion that had been carefully woven around the billionaire, and with every blow, the reality of what had almost happened sank deeper into the minds of those present. The executives stammered and tried to laugh it off, but their voices cracked, their excuses brittle and weak against the weight of their own recorded betrayal. Security guards began to move forward, their eyes sharp, their steps heavy with authority. The crowd held its breath as the balance of power visibly shifted, not in favor of the wealthy manipulators, but toward the courage of a single waitress. What began as a night to expand fortunes had unraveled into a reckoning that no one would forget. The billionaire's empire had been saved, not by lawyers or advisors, but by the bravery of someone society had overlooked. And in that moment, it was clear to all that truth had found its voice in the most unexpected place. The hall erupted into chaos the moment the recording ended, and within seconds, security guards stormed toward the executives who had orchestrated the trap. Their protests were loud, desperate, and full of empty excuses, but no one was listening anymore. The carefully crafted masks they had worn all evening had been ripped away, exposing their greed and deceit for all to see. Gasps and murmurs echoed as the guards forced them to stand, their expensive suits doing little to shield them from the humiliation that now clung to them. Guests who had once been dazzled by their promises now turned their faces away in disgust. The air, once heavy with anticipation for a monumental deal, now pulsed with the raw energy of justice. As the schemers were dragged toward the exit, the billionaire slowly rose to his feet. His eyes, once fixed on the contract, now searched, only for the woman who had dared to stop him from signing. When he found her standing quietly among the stunned crowd, his face softened, and he raised a hand to silence the room. The hush that fell over the banquet hall was profound, every person leaning forward, eager to hear his words. For the first time that night, the billionaire spoke not about money, not about power, but about gratitude. His voice carried through the hall, strong and unshaken, as he declared his respect for the woman who had risked everything to speak up. He admitted that if not for her courage, his empire would have been stolen in plain sight. The acknowledgement drew a wave of applause, the sound echoing off crystal and marble until it seemed the walls themselves were joining in. The waitress lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden recognition, but in her heart she knew she had done what was right. The evening that was meant to celebrate a signature had turned into something greater, something unforgettable. Word of what had happened traveled quickly beyond those gilded walls, carried by the whispers of stunned guests who could not stop retelling the story. By the next morning, it was no longer just a banquet scandal. It had become a lesson spoken. In offices, homes, and streets, people marveled not at the billionaire's wealth, but at the quiet bravery of a woman who chose integrity over silence. She had reminded them that power was not always found in money, contracts, or titles, but in the courage to speak the truth when no one else would. As the last of the guests left that night, they carried more than just the memory of a disrupted deal. They carried a lesson that lingered in their hearts, that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can speak with the greatest strength. And though the banquet had ended without a single pen stroke on the contract, it had given everyone present something far more valuable than wealth. It had given them a moment of truth they would never forget.